They say Dean Martin always walked on stage with a smile. But that night, the smile vanished before he even touched the microphone. No one in the packed showroom caught it at first. The lights were gold and forgiving, spreading over the tables like warm syrup. The scent of perfume mixed with top-shelf whiskey, the kind that drifted sweet and sharp across velvet drapes that had seen too many late nights. Dice clicked faintly from the casino beyond the doors, a rhythm Vegas never stopped humming. The crowd buzzed, laughter here, a toast there, until Dean stepped into the light. And something in the room shifted. He moved with his usual effortless grace, jacket sitting just right, tie perfectly centered. But by the time he reached his mark, the cheerfulness in the crowd had thinned into a curious hush. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a small change in temperature, like someone cracked open a door to colder air. Dean's gaze skimmed the front rows, habit, instinct, and then it locked. A young man sat just left of center, shoulders squared, eyes bright with the thrill of finally seeing a legend up close. On his jacket, catching the spotlight at just the wrong angle, was a fabric insignia, blue and gold stitching. A wing, a patch belonging to the Air National Guard. Exactly the kind his son wore. The rest of the room blurred. Dean didn't blink, not right away. The patch was an inch-wide piece of fabric, nothing more, yet it sliced through the haze of light and sound as if the whole showroom had narrowed into that single emblem. For one flickering instant, he wasn't in Vegas. He was standing in a colder room years earlier, listening to a phone ring before dawn. His expression barely changed. Only the careful observer would have caught the shift, the subtle drop of the corner of his mouth, the way his shoulders tightened before he disguised it as a casual adjustment of his jacket. His breath hitched, shallow, like someone had reached inside and pinched a nerve that never fully healed. A muted tremor passed through the band behind him. The pianist glanced at the drummer. The drummer looked at Dean. A tech crouched beside an amp hesitated with his hand on a cable, as if waiting for a cue he couldn't name. The audience sensed a disturbance without understanding it. Conversations faltered, drinks paused mid-air. A ripple of cold uncertainty spread outward. Dean didn't look away. The young man with the patch shifted in his seat, unaware of the weight he'd just dropped on a stranger he admired. His jacket caught another flick of light, the insignia bright as a fresh bruise. Dean lifted the microphone. Then, in the same motion, he lowered it again. A silence stretched, thin, fragile, refusing to break. It wasn't the expectant hush of a show about to begin. It was the kind that arrives when something private, something painful, slips into a place it was never meant to be seen. Only a handful of people in the room understood that something inside him had moved, quietly, deeply, and with the force of a memory he'd spent years trying to bury. And the night had only just begun. Most of the people in that showroom knew the public outline of his life. Very few knew why a scrap of thread on a stranger's jacket could hit him harder than any bad review. Years earlier, before the tabloids and the obituaries finished their work, there had been a different kind of headline in his house. His boy had gone into the Air National Guard, young, sure of himself, proud of the wings on his shoulder. Dean had shaken his hand that day the way fathers do when they're trying not to show both pride and fear at once. He'd joked, made light of it. But after the jokes, he'd kept the photo in his wallet longer than he admitted. Then came the night when the phone rang at an hour that never brings good news. Voices he didn't know at the other end. Formal words, cautious pauses, details about weather, instruments, terrain. The kind of language that piles up around a disaster because plain speech feels too brutal. From that point on, anything that flew had a different sound in his world. Conversation about airplanes went quiet around him, not because he demanded it, but because people sensed the drop in his eyes when the topic wandered too close. He didn't rage. He didn't break glasses or punch walls. He did something in a way harder. He folded the grief up and put it away where no one had to see it. There was a drawer in his home that almost no one touched. Inside, neatly arranged, were a watch, a pair of cufflinks, a faded snapshot with a pilot's helmet tilted at a cocky angle, and one old worn cloth patch. Not framed, not displayed, just waiting, as if time might one day return what it had taken. On stage, the world thought Dean had kept moving. More records, more tours, more jokes about whiskey and women. But in the quiet pieces between shows, other currents ran. Late-night calls from men who remembered the old days, nudging him about favors, about appearances, about obligations he'd rather have forgotten. Little reminders that the past wasn't done with him, even when he tried to ignore it. The week before that Vegas show, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single line, typed, not handwritten. Some symbols never disappear. They show up when you least expect them. No signature, no explanation, just that sentence, sitting on his kitchen table like a dare. He'd read it twice, then slid it into the same drawer as the patch, telling himself it was nothing. A crank, a stray piece of odd mail. And then, that night, he walked onto the stage and saw the insignia on a stranger's chest. Beside the young man in the front row sat another figure, older, quieter. Dean didn't recognize him immediately. Only after a long second did memory supply a context. An officer from an training base visit years ago, a man who'd once shaken his son's hand and promised, "We'll look after him." Not a villain, not a friend, just a face connected to the last chapter of a life cut short. Out in the haze of light, the crowd saw a star hesitating. Inside his ribs, something different was happening. The lines between then and now blurred. The symbol on that jacket wasn't abstract. It was personal, and it stood 10 feet away from him, breathing, watching, alive. The audience expected a joke, a song, an easy glide into the set. What they got instead was a man suddenly standing in two eras at once, under the hot lamps of Las Vegas and in the long shadow of a loss that applause had never really drowned out. The spotlight hadn't moved, but to Dean, it felt harsher now, whiter, like it was cutting edges into everything it touched. From the back, the room still looked festive, sequins catching light, ice winking in glasses. Up close, a strange hush had settled over the front rows. Conversations thinned, then frayed, until there was more listening than talking. The band waited with instruments poised, but no one dared count off the next tune. Dean shifted his weight, shoes quiet on the boards. For a heartbeat, he let his eyes slide away from the patch, toward the balcony, the bar, anywhere else. They kept drifting back, pulled as if by a string. The young man in the jacket had no idea he carried more than cloth. His hand went to the microphone again. Fingers brushed the cool metal, then stopped short. He left it in the stand. A small pause, barely a second, yet heavy enough that the drummer glanced toward the wings, wondering if he'd missed a signal. Behind the curtain line, an assistant edged closer than usual, 1 foot over the tape mark, ready to step in if something, anything, needed fixing. A guard in the shadows near the wall, whose job was usually to scan for rowdy gamblers, found his gaze dragging instead between Dean, the insignia, and the man sitting beside it. His posture lost that easy, bored slouch. He stood up straight. In the second row, a woman folded her program in half, then in half again, fingertips whitening at the crease. She couldn't have said why her chest felt tight. All she knew was that the man on stage seemed to be carrying a weight that hadn't been in the ticket price. From somewhere off to the side, a stray line of piano leaked out, just a player noodling absent-mindedly backstage. The phrase happened to mirror a melody Dean's son used to hum under his breath, imitating his father's records. The echo pricked at him sharper than the lights. "Ready for us, Dean?" A voice called from the darkness, friendly, assuming routine. The words were harmless, but the cadence was wrong. It matched too closely how someone else, long gone, used to tease him before a show. The past, it seemed, wasn't content with memories. It wanted sound, too. Dean's jaw tightened. He drew in air through his nose, slow, measuring. He could feel the minute muscles around his eyes pull, the kind of strain that never reached the cheap seats but was plain as day to the trumpet player watching from 10 feet away. The young man with the patch shifted, as if sensing he had become the center of something he didn't understand. He half rose, then sat back, a small, aborted movement. The older man beside him, the officer from long ago, tilted his head in a quiet acknowledgement, not quite a nod, not quite an apology. A stray reflection from the overhead rig bounced directly onto the insignia. The colors flared brighter for a second, the wings almost glowing. No one had touched the dimmers. It was just the luck of angles. To Dean, it felt intentional. In the wings, someone whispered, "He's off. You see that?" Another voice, lower, "Give him a second. Don't rush him." Dean stepped closer to the edge of the stage. The sea of faces answered by falling completely still. Even the habitual gamblers, the ones who usually kept one eye on their watches and one on the exits, forgot to fidget. He wasn't looking at the room anymore. He was looking through it, past the smoke and chandeliers, past the rows of expectant eyes, toward a stretch of runway only he could see. Whatever he said or did next would not be for the audience. Not really. It would be for the person who wasn't there. A tiny pop from the microphone cracked the silence, soft but sharp enough to slice straight through the room. Every head lifted. Every whisper died. Even the air seemed to tighten, stretch thin between stage and audience. Light carved a clean white path around Dean, isolating him, outlining him with a clarity he hadn't asked for. The shadows behind him deepened, swallowing the wings. Nothing existed now except the man, the mic, and the insignia that refused to fade from his vision. The speaker system gave a faint hiss, then steadied as if waiting for his next breath. Dean didn't take the microphone in hand this time. He drew himself up slowly, one subtle shift at a time, until his posture held a quiet resolve. The spotlight caught a tremor in the fingers that hung at his side, barely there, but real enough to betray the storm gathering inside him. He looked again at the young man with the patch, not at his face, at the uniform mark over his heart. It shone under the lights like a small sun. Dean exhaled once, sharp, not loud, but it echoed through the room as if amplified. Then he spoke. "Hold on," he said, barely above a stage whisper. "Give me a minute." 6 words, calm, unornamented, but they struck the room like a warning bell. The audience froze, not out of impatience, but because they understood instantly that this wasn't part of the show. A man near the bar lowered his drink midair. A woman clutched her husband's arm. Someone in the back shifted, then stopped, unwilling to break the spell. Dean stepped forward, and the boards underfoot gave a soft, audible sigh, wood, remembering weight. His eyes flicked again to the insignia, lingering there with a gravity that felt private, almost sacred. His voice didn't return right away. Instead, he swallowed, shoulders dipping for a fraction of a second before lifting again, controlled but not completely steady. The trembling in his hand returned, and for the first time that night, he didn't try to hide it. Behind the crowd, a cough broke the silence, thin and nervous. Someone adjusted a coat. The sound system hummed as if clearing its throat. None of it touched him. Dean raised his head. He wasn't looking at the dazzling room anymore. He wasn't even looking at the man wearing the patch. His gaze was somewhere far past all of them, somewhere the lights didn't reach, somewhere only he could see. The spotlight flickered as though trying to hold him in place. Then, as if deciding to stop fighting the truth pressing against his ribs, he let the microphone fall from his hand entirely. It dropped an inch, hit the stage with a soft metallic knock, rolled slightly, and stopped. That single sound echoed in the rafters like a verdict. A tremor passed through the auditorium. Not panic, recognition. People later would say they'd felt like intruders, like witnesses to something they weren't meant to see. Not pain exactly. not grief. Something more like a door opening where no door should be. Dean drew a steadier breath, though it cost him. The stage lights glinted in the corner of his eye, revealing a wetness there he didn't wipe away. He let his arms fall to his sides, palms open, as if in surrender, not to the audience, not to the moment, but to the memory he'd avoided for years. The room didn't move, and in that suspended quiet, the narrator's truth settled over everything. That was the instant the concert ended and something far more human began. The moment Dean Martin finally stopped running from the shadow that had followed him, quietly, faithfully, all the way to Vegas.